Rhythm, 2 syllables, strong, weak. In prosody, which is a study of rhythm in language and literature, the word is what we call a trochee, stressed, unstressed. Now, if I were to repeat this word in succession, rhythm, 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 I would establish a pulse, or a beat, or a groove, or what we call in music and poetry, a meter. The word rhythm comes to us from the Greek rhythmos, meaning measured flow, repetition in time or space of an action, or regular repeated pattern of sound or movement. And this idea of flow, of alternation, repetition, and pattern is central to understanding how rhythm works in language and in the world. Rhythm is familiar to us because rhythm is body. Any action we perform with any degree of regularity produces rhythm. When we walk, when we run, when we sing, when we dance, when we swim, when we ride a bike, when we breathe, when we dream, we do so rhythmically. Alternation, pattern, flow. Rhythm is intrinsic to all of the arts and flows across the arts, including the 3 forms that I specialize in: literature, music, and dance. As a comparatist, I work across languages and cultures and media, and as a scholar of the comparative arts, what unites all that I do is the study of rhythm. The steps of a dance, the meter of a song, and the rhythm of a poem all perform rhythm. When we think of rhythm in language, we return to some of our earliest experiences of language. A lullaby, for example. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. There, too, we have a trochee, strong, weak, twinkle, and 4 beats or 4 feet in a meter called trochaic tetrameter. When we think of rhythm in literature, we think of poetry. Shakespeare, for example, Sonnet 73, one of his best. The first quatrain reads, "That time of year thou mayest in me behold, when yellow leaves, or none, or few, do hang upon those boughs which shake against the cold, bare, ruined choirs, where late the sweet birds sang." The meter there is the opposite of trochaic, iambic, weak, strong, and we have not 4 beats but 5 in a meter called iambic pentameter. Repetition, meter, rhyme, and therefore rhythm. T.S. Eliot had the idea that a poem or a passage of a poem may tend to realize itself first as a particular rhythm before it reaches expression in words. He's speaking here about the creative process of composition, but speaking too to the idea of poetry as a vocal art, the idea that the poem is a score for voice, and that a poem has 2 lives, one on the page, one when read aloud. How else to read poetry but syllable by syllable, word by word, line by line? And when we read poetry, we pay an intense attention to its rhythm. But what about the rhythm of prose? Why, when it comes to prose, do we do almost the opposite? We scan prose visually, superficially, for information, for content, for idea, without paying any attention really at all to the sound that the words make and the rhythm that those words produce. Is prose somehow inferior to poetry? Well, the poet Coleridge certainly thought so. He says, "I wish our clever young poets would remember my homely definitions of prose and poetry. That is, prose is words in their best order, poetry, the best words in the best order." Now, if that's true and prose isn't the best words, it follows that it really makes no sense to pay attention to the rhythm of those words. But prose, even badly written, has a rhythm, and I would agree with A.M. Bell when he says that in every sentence, however uttered, there is a rhythm. There's a rhythm in that sentence, in the sentence I'm saying now, and the sentence I'm yet to speak. Prose, although predominantly non-metrical, is never non-rhythmical. The rhythm of prose is more varied and regular, and less regular than that of poetry, but no less present. An absence of meter does not mean an absence of rhythm. Now, writers and philosophers from antiquity, from Aristotle and Cicero to the present day, Amy Hempel and Lydia Davis, have all remarked upon the significance of the rhythm of prose. But it is really the master prose stylists of the mid to late 19th and early 20th century, the modernists, those virtuosic writers whom I've chosen to study in my doctoral work, who captured and harnessed and exploited the power of prose rhythm in the novel. Gustave Flaubert, as he was writing Madame Bovary, spoke of hearing pre-verbal rhythms. He believed that a passage of prose should be just as sonorous, just as rhythmic as any line of poetry. Virginia Woolf, as she was writing one of her most experimental novels, The Waves, said that she was writing not to a plot, but to a rhythm, that she was writing prose yet poetry, collapsing that binary distinction or opposition between prose and poetry that the modernists successfully and forever did away with. An example from her earlier novel, To the Lighthouse, when Woolf has her protagonist, Mrs. Ramsay, put the children to bed, Woolf does not write as a lesser stylist might have, she closed the door. Woolf allows us to hear the door being closed. She writes, and let the tongue of the door slowly lengthen in the lock, a phrase that performs acoustically the seemingly prosaic action it describes. James Joyce, as he was writing his first book of fiction, Dubliners, would read aloud the stories to his friend Italo Svevo, the Italian writer, in Trieste, including the novella that closes that collection, The Dead, which contains some of the most exquisite prose ever written in the English language. As Joyce was writing Ulysses, the Oxen of the Sun episode of Ulysses, he was reading George Saintsbury's A History of English Prose Rhythm, 1912. Now, I mentioned Joyce, Saintsbury, and reading aloud because I believe if we're serious about studying the rhythm of prose, we have to be serious about studying orality, which means working not only from texts, but from performances and recordings of texts and transcriptions of those recordings. This is a challenge to prosody as traditionally practiced, which assumes that there's a single scansion of a poem or a passage of prose, a definitive reading. I'd like to close with an example from one of my case studies on the work of the Danish writer Karen Blixen. Blixen considered herself a kind of modern Scheherazade. She was famous for reading her work aloud on the radio and on tour, including the 1959 tour she made to America when she visited Radcliffe. On that occasion, she read from her first book of fiction, Seven Gothic Tales, an excerpt entitled The Wine of the Tetrarch. And here we have the very last passage from that excerpt, and I'll visualize for you some of the rhetorical rhythmical effects in the prose, including alliteration and anaphora, repetition, and parallelism. Visualizing the text tells us something, but the eye alone cannot tell us all that we need to know when it comes to rhythm. So I'd like to take a short excerpt of that passage and have you listen to a recording of Blixen performing that text. As you listen, focus your attention on the grain of her voice, on the cadence of her sentences, on the breath and pause she makes between those sentences, on the crescendo and emphasis she places on the obvious repetitions of the monosyllable name and the proper noun Barabbas, a dactyl, strong, weak, weak. And in so doing, I think you'll have an embodied experience of rhythm. So here is Blixen from an archival 1959 recording kept in the Woodbury Poetry Room.
My name, he said. Do you not know my name? My name was cried out on Friday last, all over Jerusalem. Barabbas, they cried. Barabbas, give us Barabbas. My name is Barabbas. That name will be remembered. With these words, he walked away.
Hearing Blixen read that passage aloud makes rhythm audible and draws the attention of our ears to the acoustics of her voice and the rhythm of her prose, otherwise overlooked by the eye and forgotten on the page. An attention to rhythm is an attention to beauty. Thank you.